Welcome to Self-Funded. I'm your host, Chrissy Francona. 10 years ago, starting a business around yourself was something reserved for celebrities. Today, professionals everywhere are breaking away from the 9-to-5 and building businesses around their own experience and expertise. On this show, we'll explore what it really means to be self-funded, the movement of professionals carving their own path, creating cash-flowing businesses, and building lasting impact without waiting for permission. I'll share my own journey and talk with others who are rethinking what's possible when you take your career into your own hands. Let's dive in. Today on Self-Funded, I talked to Dana Hork. Dana is the founder and CEO of Beers with Friends, a creative microagency helping ambitious brands solve high-stake challenges in just 5 days through its signature beer run sprint approach. In our conversation, we talk about her experience as a marketing leader and the frustration she had with the agency model, how she took inspiration from Saturday Night Live, and how she used early customer conversations to guide her productized offering. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Dana Hork, welcome to Self-Funded.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
We get to catch up as friends and as people who are building businesses around their experience. So I'm so excited to I follow you and I know you and I know about it, but I'm so excited to hear more about what you're doing and your journey. So you are the founder and CEO of Beers with Friends. For anyone who is hearing that the first time, which is a genius name, who are you and what do you do?
So Beers with Friends is a creative agency. And more specifically, it's the creative agency I wished I'd had when I was a client-side marketer. So we help marketers tap into creative firepower when and how they need it via 5-day sprints that we call beer runs. So if you look at the traditional creative agency model, it tends to be in two sizes, big and small. Mm-hmm. There's big holdcos with big agency of record relationships, and then there's small independent agencies, but they really have the same model behind both of them. What we've done is flip the business model into something that's much more agile, that's much more collaborative, and that clients can turn on and off. We call it creativity on tap. So we work with senior brand leaders at ambitious companies and help them, build campaigns. We help them with social strategy. We help them crack their next challenge on their brand bucket list.
Very cool. And you said this was the agency that you wished you had. So I want to hear more about your background and sort of how that led to you founding Beers with Friends. So you've worked inside some of these ambitious brands, these major consumer brands like Wonder and Walmart and Jet.com, where you were one of the earlier employees. What were you seeing and experiencing behind the scenes that made you realize the traditional agency model was not serving today's marketers?
Yeah, so the pace of modern marketing organizations is much more rapid than it's ever been. And the problem wasn't that great agencies didn't have access to great creativity. The problem was the system around it was broken and agency client trust was broken. So, big agencies of record are incentivized to have bigger, longer, slower agency of record relationships. And you end up spending all this time, talking about when you're going to book the next meeting instead of just having the meeting. You spend a lot of time figuring out how many rounds of review and what the deliverables are instead of pre-agreeing to all of that and creating a process where actually people are weighing in and your team as a client is weighing in real time versus black box structure. Creative agencies staff projects with whoever's available, not necessarily who the right people are for the job. So Beers with Friends is something that's much more flexible, much more agile, much more transparent, and really excited by how we've been able to help ambitious brands tackle their biggest challenges.
It sounds like sort of what you're describing is almost like agencies are a good fit for like maybe a big corporate environment of like the meeting to have a meeting to have a meeting. Whereas like you saw something of this sort of emergent, ambitious brands just needing something that was more agile and fit more with their pace.
Yeah, ambitious marketers are looking for progress. They're looking for someone to understand what they already bring to the table, value it, include it in the process, but move the ball down the field further. So, for example, traditional big agency relationships, they don't want to take the work halfway or half-baked. I think marketers understand that they've moved the ball forward in some capacity. Maybe they have a strategy. They certainly know who their target consumer is, but they need you to move the ball down the field. I wanted to build an agency that was happy to take the ball wherever a client wanted to give it, make progress, and then hand it back. Why do you need to pay an agency for weeks of brand immersion when you could just create a process where brands were included in the process in the first place and bringing their brand expertise to the table? I also felt when I was a client-side marketer that I wanted to spend more and more time being creative and contributing to creative work. I think the agency process is often a black box. You give a brief, then they write an internal brief, they come back, present it, you're hoping it's great, and then you work through rounds and rounds of reviews. I wanted a process where marketers who are already brand experts, they're passionate, and they have their own great ideas, we're able to contribute those into the process and flex those muscles. That's something I always loved doing brand side. And I wanted to build a process where we could do that more and more with client side marketers.
So you obviously had a ton of experience on the client side, and you're talking about that and some of the frustrations and opportunities you saw. But starting Beers with Friends, you had a lot of experience, but it was on the other side of the table. How did you just switch sides, and what did that experience look like?
Yeah, so I'd say two things about this. One, I think people don't often see their Achilles heel as their superpower, but they need to view it as a superpower. By that, I mean, there were a million reasons why I shouldn't start an agency. Namely, I'd never worked agency side. But my superpower is that I've been a client and I know what the agency experience feels like from the client side. I know what clients are trying to get done. I know what success looks like. I also know all of the things that get in the way of great agency work getting into the world and having direct business results. And what I mean by that is I think great agency work does do that, but so many times so much happens outside your control. The client leaves, the budget gets cut, a global event happens.
You obviously experienced this from the client side, and you saw that even though you had not had the agency experience, you saw this friction and you knew it existed. You have a co-founder. So tell me a little bit about how you guys came together and where this really started.
So when James and I started Beers with Friends, we didn't start with a business plan. We started with an honest conversation. James and I had been agency client partners before when I was at Walmart running social media and James was at a Publicis agency, MRY. So we had lived both sides of the relationship independently and together on our work together for Walmart. And we sat down and had a really candid conversation about everything that worked when we worked together, why there were so many misalignments, what could be better about the process. And Beers with Friends really was built out of that shared reflection and shared conversation. And we designed a model, rooted in trust, in clarity, in speed, in creative chemistry, in thinking outside the box, all based on our experiences navigating large corporations, but coming together to create great work together.
I love that you guys both had experienced the problem from different perspectives. And even though it's funny, because as you're describing some of the frustrations you had with the agency model, you still went to someone that you had worked with in this agency model to found this new venture with, which is pretty telling about like how you both valued each other's experience and perspective.
One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was the importance of shared consciousness. And James and I had shared consciousness from day one because we'd worked together before. And we were able to have an open and honest conversation together about what worked and what didn't work and what could be better. So I always encourage founders to, if you're going to have a co-founder and build something with someone else, make sure you have shared consciousness from day one.
That's such great advice. And it sounds like it's something that's really worked for you guys. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this, Beers with Friends being this creative microagency is the term you use. What does that actually mean in practice, and why did you choose that positioning?
So we use creative agency to describe ourselves so that people know what we do, but we added micro to it to explain how we do it differently. So our model is quite different from a traditional model. rather than taking on big agency of record relationships, we work in 5-day sprints called beer runs. So already a model that is built off of some of the best in class sprint models like Google Ventures, Saturday Night Live, is one way that we do it differently. Another way we do it differently is we don't have full-time staff. We have an extremely strong roster of strategists, creative subject matter experts that we bring in to surround ourselves with for each and every client project. We talk about it like a heist, like for whatever the brief is, we put the right team together to pull off the heist.
It's like Ocean's 11 or whatever. You're like, you need the person who's the lockpick person, the person who plays blackjack, like all of the things. So
100%. So that's another piece that's different. And a third piece that's different is that we only take on one client at a time. One of the scarcest commodities right now is focus. And one of our superpowers is that we have the ability to do nothing for a 5-day period of time except crack the code on a client's brief. And that enables us to avoid being creative within 7-minute increments between meetings. It allows us to be fully focused, fully dedicated, and it helps drive breakthrough creativity.
I love that. And so much of what you're saying resonates so much with me because it's funny. And, I have a business called The Long Game that's, I sometimes struggle with what to call it because it's consulting, but consulting sort of has this like negative vibe in some ways. So I'm like, it's a talent network and there's a different delivery model. And so I love how you added the creative agency as a known entity and people know who needs a creative agency and when, but microagency is like, oh, that's different. And you have this whole, process around it that differentiates it.
Yeah. And I think that's important because in order to have share of mind, you need to have a trigger of when people are going to think of you and know when to call. So if you position yourself as something that's too different, you don't fit anywhere in their mental model that will help you get thought of when they need something to get done. But if you fit too squarely in a box, then you're not seen as differentiated. You're not seen as, adding value, innovative, et cetera. And so I think the model of finding something that is already common language, but finding a new spin on it and finding a way to own real estate and share of mind that's a little bit different, I think is an important strategy.
I love that. That's such good advice. I had a couple weeks ago, I had on a guy named Phil Levine who has a company in recruiting called Golden Gate Recruits. And his like differentiator is he's so specific on his niche. And like his tagline is something like, I bring, move consultants into tech. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And he's cornered that market and done really, really well with it. But it made me think of it because it's such good advice of like, be specific enough that people know, people know how to use you and when to use you. And, at the same time, make sure you're adding value in a way that, the market needs. So,
yeah, a different way, something we say a lot is creativity on tap. And that already tells you in a more benefit oriented way, wow, they help bring me creativity, but it's a much more flexible model. I can have it when I need it. And I don't have it when I don't need it. And so it communicates a lot in that short little phrase.
I love everything you're saying. And I think the fact in your experience, like this is just so much based on your experience and you knew there was a problem to solve. I think at the same time, like it's what I'd love to get your perspective on is when you're building something disruptive in a very traditional industry and a very standardized industry, like even people who have sat in your seat and experienced the pain and friction, like I think of like the adage, like no one gets fired for hiring IBM. Like, how do you think about, like, did you face pushback of, yes, they get, like, your potential clients really get the problem and get the differentiated offering, but at the same time, like, agency of record is agency of record. Like, how did you think about that early on?
There's a common trait that I see across all of our clients. In order to build a differentiated brand, you need to work in a differentiated way. And ambitious CMOs aren't going to break through doing the same thing that the others in their category are doing. They need fresh perspective. They need to move much more quickly. They need a process that brings what they have into it rather than shutting them out in a black box. And ambitious brand builders are very open to trying new models, trying new partners. It's the only way that they're going to differentiate and succeed in building a differentiated brand.
I'd love to chat more about, you've alluded to it, but your beer run sprint is your signature offer there. How did that come to be? Like, because I imagine part of when you're starting this, like there is this sort of tension of like, you got to get revenue. And so sometimes it's like, yeah, this isn't quite what we want to do, but like, we'll take the work. Like, how much of that did you have to do versus like you had this specific offering at the start and this was the only thing you were offering? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when we launched, we didn't launch with a business plan. We didn't launch with a perfect product market fit. We said, we know what our superpowers are. We know why people will want to hire us. We know what the needs are in the market. Let's just start, learn as we go, and perfect the model in real time. And so when we first started taking on clients, we took on projects that were just that, projects. They weren't sprint oriented. We did bring speed to the table and we did bring some of those value propositions together, but it wasn't a productized offering like it is now. And through those early clients, we were able to understand that building a scalable product for our services would enable us to deliver on our value prop in the best way. So that's where we went out. We started studying other best in class sprint frameworks, everything from Google Ventures, which is often applied to product development and innovation, to Saturday Night Live, which puts on a show every week that goes on the air at 11:35, if they're ready or not. Right. So we went out and looked at those and they had very common ingredients. They had ingredients like reconfirming, the problem we're trying to solve, divergent thinking, convergent thinking, iterating, testing, bursts of focused work, frequent alignment. And so we pulled out that all together and codified our own process, and it really clicked. And we started hearing feedback from clients like, wow, that was amazing. I'm so thrilled and overjoyed with the work that we just got. Wow, this really got us unstuck. Wow, my team was able to all come together and put their fingerprints on this work, and we're all really energized by it. So we didn't start with a defined sprint model. We built it as we went along. And once we started hearing client feedback that it was really resonating, we moved forward with that model.
I love that. And I think a couple things you're hitting on there. One is certainly just iterating as you go. Like, you knew you had the experience, you knew there was friction in the market and frustration because you had been on the client side. You knew there was a better way to do it, but you really sort of put yourself out there and figured it out as you went. Because I do think when you're doing a services business, like I say this a lot, like there's no building in stealth for 8 months. Like, you're putting yourself out there and you're iterating like real time from a commercial perspective. And then the second thing I just want to highlight that you mentioned, and this is one of my favorite structures in this type of experience entrepreneurship, is like, take a framework that works somewhere else and put it into a new space. So like, example I always use is like Donald Miller, who has built Story Brand as a really big framework. It's essentially the hero's journey, and he just takes it and puts it into, he's done a lot of work around it, but takes it and puts it into a business structure. And so I love the SNL example because I have, I've read about that, of how like that there is this, on Sundays we do this and Mondays, all of that. So that's such a cool analogy that you used.
Correct. And what's been interesting about that is that it breaks a lot of the traditional things that you think you're supposed to do before you start a business. So, you're always supposed to be laser focused on the customer. And often you might have to poke around at different demographics or psychographics around your target customer before you have product market fit to figure out what works. So what we discovered through the process is we built this beer run process similar to what you mentioned on SNL. On Mondays we do this and on Tuesdays we do that. But what we found is that it resonates with different type of customers. We have early stage brands where we're their big agency and we allow them to tap into the A team in a way that's accessible with their budgets. We're also the small agency for big brands who already have an agency of record, but might have work that's moving slowly, smaller moments falling through the cracks, or they want to put us in comp with their in-house team and their agency of record, because more ideas and answers more quickly helps them move forward more quickly. So we learned a lot about this process. We have a similar psychographic across our marketers, but what types of brands they're working on, how much money those brands have raised, whether they're the leader in their category or challenger in their category, all of them find value in this process. They might just use it for different purposes.
That's so interesting. Like, you're basically creating this like multifaceted market without like changing what you're doing. Like, you are sort of saying authentically true to what you offer, and you're able to like unlock multiple markets as a result.
Right. And so something interesting we did in the beginning is we built our website on Shopify. I don't know a single creative agency that has built their website on Shopify. It's typically used for businesses with an e-commerce channel. But what we did was we dimensionalized over 60 different beer runs and gave them really fun names as a way of showing how the beer run can be used for lots of different use cases and lots of different need states for clients. So they might be focused on deliverables. We have one that's one of our most popular called campaigns. And it's a campaign development beer run. It can live at the brand campaign level, a seasonal moment, a retailer launch. So that's a particular use case. Also have beer runs that are things called, and I don't know if you bleep, but hot shit ideas in a can, which is just, we need a bunch of hot shit ideas. It could be because the boss came back from Cannes and has ideas. It could be because we really need to make our plan in Q4 and we need to try a bunch of stuff. So they might be functional in nature or more emotionally connected, but we've got over 60 beer runs on our website, bwfagency.com. And it really helps clients communicate with us what they need and why they need it and how a beer run could help them crack the code.
That's so fast. So do you find, like, for each of those, like, is someone going on and like adding to their cart? Like, what is that? How are you pulling insight from that and leading that into business? I'm so curious.
Yeah. So we look at the data on what people are browsing and clicking on. So that's something that we do. People do check out carts. So we made the price zero. And people do check it out as a way to indicate interest. Like, I'm interested in talking more about this beer run for this category, which is great. What we also found is that it really helps in the conversation with clients. So it might be during a meeting with a client and they'll say, I already looked at your website. I'm thinking what I might need is, this beer run or that beer run. So it gives us common language earlier on, further down the funnel, less from a cold prospecting perspective and more from a consideration perspective.
You're basically creating a menu that your customer can like. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but remember, like, when Dry Bar launched, like, I don't know, like 15 years ago, and it was like, oh, I want the Mai Tai. I don't even remember, or the Cosmopolitan. Like, I don't even remember what they like represented, but it was like a drink list, and you picked your hairstyle based on that.
100%. So I love that you bring up Dry Bar. So we've talked about Dry Bar a lot because it was really iconic in building a brand around focus. So remember, their slogan was no cuts, no colors, just blowouts.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of conversations about being an agency that's delivering creative firepower. We don't do media buying. We don't do analytics. We really specialize in creativity on tap and being okay with it. And we've built an amazing roster of partners that we can hand work off to, or sometimes we take on the execution ourselves, but being comfortable owning your superpower, I think, is really important. And Dry Bar does a really good job of that.
Yeah. And I shifting gears a little, but I'm gonna tie back to what we're talking about is, I imagine that your focus is the extent to which you are focused and what you're doing and what you're not doing is actually very important and value add in an AI world, where it's like, how have you thought about that aspect of, and I imagine a lot of the big agencies are really dealing with an existential crisis right now around AI. How have you thought about like bringing AI into your process, or you're almost like a disruptive force in the world that's become everything looks like bland ChatGPT output?
Yeah. So I think the conversation around AI is a great example of both things can be true. So AI accelerates everything, right? It allows us to move more quickly, to gather broader perspectives, to have efficiency, to like, there's so much that AI unlocks, but it also is amplifying the importance of senior judgment, experience, taste, perspective, and that's becoming more valuable, not less. So I think we're in a world of both. I love using AI. I love trying anything. We both already discussed that we're Whisper Flow users.
Love it.
Which I love. And so I think you want to hire partners in any work you're doing that have a growth mindset, that are trying everything, that are using it. I built on Lovable over winter break. I have 2 apps that I've now built. Like, you want to work with people that are using everything, trying everything, but you also want to work with people who bring expertise, real lived experience, taste, craft, and all of that to the table. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of our clients, they've got great execution resources. They're using AI to the best of their ability. What they're missing is senior level judgment, outside perspective, real breakthrough creativity. And that's what we bring to the table.
I love it. And that's exactly, like, I talk about through this podcast, the notion of being like an experienced entrepreneur, and how, and I had sort of had this like concept in my mind, but came up with that term recently. And I talked a little bit about this on a previous episode, but really inspired by a couple of LinkedIn posts I'd seen, one of which actually mentioned this notion of, like, it was in response to Amazon laying off tens of thousands of employees, and a lot of whom are like mid to senior career level people who had great compensation packages and everything at Amazon, and are probably a little bit of like, oh shit, what do I do now? And the notion that, like, you can't, like, judgment, experience, perspective, pattern recognition in a human way, not just through AI, is becoming even more powerful and important right now. And a lot of execution and efficiency can be driven by AI at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, what's shifted is that, unfortunately, with all of these layoffs and restructurings, it's created an opportunity for business models like ours that now have the ability to tap into A+ creatives and strategists, subject matter experts who also want to work more, flexible schedules, and want to work on projects they want to work on, and all of that. So the labor side of this, while it's super unfortunate that, that it's so challenging for so many companies and so many creatives right now, it creates an opportunity for models that leverage flexible talent like ours.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing on like the consulting and strategy side as well. I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk a little bit more around your experience around this. And so you certainly had, a background at venture-backed startups, have long been sort of on that path. What was sort of key to you to deciding to take what I'd call more this self-funded path around really building a business on your own terms?
Yeah, I mean, creating an independent agency allowed us to design the business that we actually believed in. So we didn't build for investor expectations. We built for our customers. We were able to build for trust, for quality, for sustainability. We were able to, prioritize what mattered to us. At the end of the day, it came down to freedom and control. And I'm so grateful that I built the business that I want to work in every day. I'm so grateful that I get to do it with someone who's extremely talented, who understands the agency side, just like I understand the client side. And I'm so grateful that we get to work with awesome clients. Almost all of our clients have been friends, referrals, and we get to live the dream, which is what we wrote effectively on a cocktail napkin when we started this, which is, how do we just make great work with great people?
I love that your inspiration comes, you mentioned a couple times, like, you guys didn't have a business plan, but you had a vision. And it sounds like that's really been your North Star, both personally and sort of with the business through this process. Is that right?
Absolutely. Beers with Friends, we chose that name very specifically. There is something magical and special and constructive about cracking a problem over beers with friends. You get the right people around the table. You get the right vibe. You have no egos. You pull out, napkins and pens and grab a couple beers or whatever you're drinking. And you're all focused on a singular mission, right? How do we help our friend tackle this thing, right? Or how do we help my friend navigate this personal relationship or this work situation? And just the vibe of being constructive and collaborative over beers with friends exactly communicates what it feels like to work with us and what our vision was from the very earliest stages. And what's interesting is we had that vision very early on. We built out our offering. We started taking on clients. But what we started to hear very consistently was the word refreshing. It was not something that we engineered from the beginning, but it actually fits perfectly with the way we've marketed ourselves like a beer brand. We hear over and over, this is a really refreshing way to work. This is a really refreshing model. That felt very refreshing. And so we actually started with the vision and we're able to build out, our brand impression and our, what we leave clients with by hearing it pulled right back to us from our own clients. So we now think of ourselves as like a refreshing take on the creative agency. And it all started with that vision of how do we create the vibes of having beers with friends.
Well, I think it probably served you in two ways. One, certainly it's amazing you're getting that feedback from your clients, and it's something, again, you maybe didn't plan for, but it's the effect of what you've built. At the same time, I'm thinking back to the fact that you're taking on, one client at a time, you're doing these sprints. I imagine it needs to also feel refreshing for you, given that this is, you're building. You guys built yourself a job. You're building a business, but you also built yourself designed a job. And so I imagine that was probably your delivery model probably serves both sides in that way.
100%. I love that every week we get to be a creative agency for a different challenge, a different brand, a different marketer with a different deliverable. So it keeps us fresh. It keeps us refreshing. And back to a comment you made earlier, there's so much value in looking outside your own vertical, your own company walls, and borrowing inspiration from other places. That's really what creativity is. And we get to do that every week by working on different sectors, working on different clients. We're constantly learning, and we get to apply, outside perspective and different industries to each and every project that we take on. So it's fun, it's engaging, and it certainly is refreshing to work that way.
That's awesome. Dana, this has been amazing. It's been fun to watch you build this. But this is, I sort of when watching, you on LinkedIn and so forth and hearing a little bit about it, but it's been so fun to just learn more about it. And I love everything you're doing. A lot of it resonates with me of building around a problem you experienced on both sides of being a client and the provider in an industry that has this sort of somewhat stagnated delivery model. Just the creativity you bring into it. Like this has been such a fun conversation, and you have a lot of great advice for people who are starting out. And you've already shared a lot of that, but I'm curious, what advice would you give someone if, they see a particular problem, either they're the operator or the client, and they potentially want to go solve that as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think the most important advice I can give to any entrepreneur is start with the problem you know better than anyone else. You have lived experience. Go back through it and think about what is the friction that you've lived firsthand. Start with the problem and don't get married to the solution yet until you go out, test small before you commit big. If you're in love with the problem that you're solving before you're in love with the solution that you're providing, that will give you the firepower to keep going, keep iterating, and keep finding a way to product market fit. Then the second piece I would say is once you have that product market fit, make sure you build something that people want to come back to, right? Every business needs lifetime value, needs recurring customers. And so build something people love and that they can't live without, and be open to exploring different models. For us, building something people want to come back to didn't mean trapping them in a big agency of record relationship. It meant being their solution for creativity on tap. And I'm so grateful. We've had so many first-time clients, so many repeat clients. And I would just share that advice with others. Build something that people want to come back to.
I love that. Where can people learn more about Beers with Friends and follow you?
You can find us in all the places. So we're most active on LinkedIn. So you can check us out there at Beers with Friends. You can follow me, Dana Hork. We also are on Instagram, TikTok,
all over,
YouTube, all over. And most importantly, go to bwfagency.com, shop our beer runs. You could look at Battle of the Brands. You could look at Perception Rehab. You can look at Brand in a Can. You can look at Kickboxing for Brand. Add one to your cart, check it out, and get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you and explore how we can help.
I love that. I have no need for an agency right now, and I'm still going to go shop because I'm like blown away by they use Shopify to build this. I'm actually so excited to go in and go through all the beer runs. So, well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to catch up and learn more about Beers with Friends, and wishing you all of the continued success as you build this business.
Thank you. And same to you on the long game and self-funded and everything you're working on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy.
Thanks for listening to Self-Funded. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show wherever you're listening so you don't miss what's coming next. I'd also love for you to leave a review and share what you're most excited about on your own self-funded journey. And if you want to go deeper, check out my Substack. You'll find the link below. Until next time, keep carving your own path.